This summer is all about good representation, fast-paced plots, and gratuitous violence. Hello, friends and enemies. Welcome to Horror and Inconvenience, where things are usually spooky and always weird. Today we're here on something almost approaching a normal video schedule to do advanced reviews of two queer YA horror novels coming out this summer. The first one, coming out toward the end of June, is You're Not Supposed to Die Tonight by Kalynn, Bayron. And the next is I Feed Her to the Beast and the Beast is Me by Jamison, Shea. Yeah, usually titles only have one clause, so that's a pretty bold choice. Now, these are both propulsive and delightfully violent horror stories with black, female, queer protagonists. But other than that, they're actually quite different. So, You're Not Supposed to Die Tonight, which is coming out at the end of June, is a sort of fresh take on a slasher story. The main character, Charity, works for a slasher-themed camp experience. The place is called Camp Mirror Lake, and basically, rather like one of those extreme haunted houses, they take guests through a slasher simulation. This is her last year at the camp, and she is playing the final girl in the show. She's very excited about it. Total horror nerd, total theater kid, really fun, relatable character. But, of course, as you can probably guess from the cover and title alone, things go wrong, and there are some real murders at the slasher summer camp. When things start to go awry and a couple of people who work at the camp disappear, she calls in her group of close friends, including her girlfriend, who is just a charming character, and they have a wonderfully loving and supportive established relationship. I love that element of this book. They try to put on the show until they realize that what's going on is actually horror stuff, and then they investigate the mystery. I'm making it sound a lot less exciting than it is. It's definitely a huge page-turner. I actually read this when I was sick earlier this year, when I had bronchitis and disappeared from the internet for a while. And so, because I was home, I read it in a day. What I think's especially fun of this, without giving anything away, is that the twist, while it still fits very comfortably into horror tropes in a way that still makes it a fun homage, it's not entirely predictable, and it's a really interesting story on its own. For me, a slasher's only fun if it has a really interesting backstory, and I'm not talking like, this serial killer was once in a mental hospital. That's not a fun backstory. I'm talking like secret societies and elder gods and that sort of thing. So it has one of the fun horror backstory tropes. And that's about all I can give away, except to add that it comments on white supremacy. So, yeah. This book centers a queer character who is strong and self-sufficient and has a loving relationship. And it has a horror backstory that strengthens its themes rather than undercutting the protagonist or the themes of the story. It's a fast read. It's very satisfying. I think this is going to do really well. This is actually the first one of Bayron's books that I've read. She also wrote Cinderella is Dead and This Poison Heart, which have been on my list for a long time. And My Dear Henry, which is the new classics remixed take on Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I'm reading it right now. It's great so far. But yeah, she's definitely a new favorite of mine now that I've sort of started on her work. So, yeah, I recommend this. I don't think it's going to change the course of YA literature, but I do think it's going to be a popular book because it's good and worth reading. I feed her to the beast, and the beast is me. Um, this book, despite a title that I think is going to do it quite a bit of a disservice in terms of marketing, um, I think it's really good, both as a horror story and as a piece of writing for young adults. I think it has a lot that's going to appeal to its audience. The tone and general vibes of this book remind me a lot of both House of Hollow and My Dearest Darkest, which were both YA horror stories I absolutely loved. It's about a black American ish ballet student, Laura, who is studying at the Paris Ballet Academy. And despite being an excellent student who's given her whole life to ballet, is constantly pushed aside because of, racism and classism in ballet. The sort of things that might have been covered by the movie Black Swan, if that movie was good. Laura has just had a crushing defeat where, despite triumphing in a lead role in her last year at the Academy, she comes across the directors of the Paris Ballet discussing her in really dehumanizing racist terms and deciding amongst themselves that she isn't right for the ballet because she's black. And reeling from this, she ends up going to dinner with another sort of dark horse contender for ballet fame, a white French girl from the lower classes who rose up startlingly fast in the ranks of the ballet after graduating the Paris Ballet Academy. Um, so she takes Laura out for a meal, sort of comforts her, and then takes her below to the Paris catacombs, where she introduces her to the elder god that she made a blood pact with in order to achieve her own fame. Laura, of course, dives right into this. She's got nothing in her life but ballet and has nothing to lose. And that is the beginning of the story. I didn't spoil more than maybe the first 40 pages. It's the premise. What delighted me about this book is that it's got the strong monster girl energy. Laura never has any regret for becoming what she becomes when she makes the blood pact. But at the same time, it undercuts certain tropes of monster horror, the kind of tropes you especially find in, say, werewolf fiction, where the beast is something that ultimately cannot be controlled, and even though, queer people love monsters because they're marginalized characters who find their own power, we are used to seeing them, we're used to seeing them lose all relatability and be defeated in the end. I can't say exactly what happens in the end or where Laura ends up falling on that scale, but I can say that a lot of those tropes that we're sort of wearily resigned to as readers are undercut in really satisfying ways in this story. There's also a really rich horror fantasy landscape that has to do with this elder god. That's really what reminded me of House of Hollow in it. And I think that for somebody who likes supernatural horror of any description, there's a lot to enjoy here. It's not something that's going to completely shock and appall you. It's really more of a dark fantasy adventure in a lot of ways. But I definitely think that this is a really worthwhile read, that it does a lot of interesting things that for me make it really stand out from the YA horror fantasy landscape. That it's got really interesting, varied representation and really richly drawn characters. And I just think it's a real shame that it got saddled with a title like this. You know, Jamison Shea is a great writer, and I'm looking forward to whatever they might produce next. And I think they deserve a lot of credit and good sales for this book. But if they came up with this title, then they need to be letting their editor help them with titles. If they didn't come up with this title, then they should not have let their editor saddle it with this title. Anyway, these are both highly recommended books coming out this summer. If you like a good YA horror story, high octane, not as high stakes as a lot of adult horror stories you might pick up. Something with complex characters and a certain amount of queer triumph, even with all the caveats that horror would give that. These are both great picks. You're Not Supposed to Die Tonight is great for slasher fans. I Feed Her to the Beast and the Beast is Me, despite its title, is great for supernatural horror and dark fantasy fans. Thanks for tuning in, and look forward to a spring reading wrap-up and Pride book recommendation video coming up soon, I hope, if I can manage.